Okay, so welcome everybody to the first of the Future Social Service Institute's Fireside Chats for 2021. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. I'd like to begin this session by acknowledging that wherever we are, we're meeting on Aboriginal land, and pay my respects to Aboriginal communities for their care of this land and for nurturing their own communities, to elders, past, present, and emerging elders, and the commitment we make to supporting them to help their communities to recover from and respond to the impact of colonisation. I'd also like to acknowledge this is an event that is predominantly focused on the family violence sector, and to acknowledge the workers who are working with women and children who are daily facing family violence, and both the survivors and women and children who have not survived from family violence. This is an incredibly live conversation at the moment, and I'd really like to welcome and thank Shelley Abrams and Michal Morris for joining this conversation with us today. I know it's something that everyone is talking about every day. This year has had a very strange and bumpy start, and you might have heard Michal say, just as we were getting ready, that restrictions have just lifted and we're like the rest of the country. I don't know that we're going to be like the rest of the country for a long time, Michal, given the impact in Victoria of lockdown and what it's like for people coming back to work. So the reason we're having this conversation is that everyone is thinking this through and working it through very live at the moment, and we thought it'd be a good opportunity to hear from from two very different perspectives, but people who are living and breathing and thinking about this a lot of their time at the moment. So I will just very briefly introduce, because you've all received their bio with the introduction an invitation to this session, but I just really want to acknowledge Shelley Abrams. Thank you so much for joining us. You, when we met, you've been at senior exec at Medibank now for over 6 years and have more than 20 years of very extensive experience as a people and culture leader in a range of organisations around the country. One of the things when we talked about this session was that you talked about living and breathing and doing extensive research about hybrid ways of working for Medibank, and really keen to hear what some of those insights are. So thank you for joining us today, Shelley.
Thanks for having me.
Michal, you're the CEO at inTouch, a multicultural centre against family violence, and you've been in that role since 2017. You've held other leadership roles in the sector with a focus on refugee and migrant populations. Prior to being at inTouch, you were the General Manager of the Centre for Culture, Ethnicity and Health for 9 years. So you've got a deep experience of leading within organisations like inTouch, and like what a lot of the family violence sector organisations are like. It's a sector with lots of organisations that have really struggled and adapted during COVID, and we've had a number of conversations about that, Michal. You've also got some really significant leadership roles that you play across the family violence sector at the moment. So you're on the board of DVRCV, you're a council member of Harmony Alliance, and you're on the Family Violence Reform Advisory Council for Family Safety Victoria. So you both bring, thank you very much for being here today, to both of you. You're on mute still, Michal. Somebody had to do it. I had to say it at least once.
So I apologise. I know I hate it when it's me. Thanks for the invite.
So, housekeeping quickly. You will all be able to see at the top of your screen a little like question mark, which is the link into the live event Q&A. If you pop questions in there, I'll feed them into the conversation with Shelley and Michal. If you like and are interested in what someone else's question is, please don't repeat it, just hit like so we can see what some of the themes are and make sure we pick them up in the conversation, because I think having insights from quite different perspectives will be useful in this conversation. So if I can kick it off, Shelley, as I said before, you've been, in your own words, living and breathing, thinking about hybrid ways of working and how do we maximise and make the most out of that. Can you talk a little bit about what you think some of the important things are to keep in mind, and maybe what some of your top priorities and tips would be?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think the first thing to really to keep top of mind and is to really listen to your employees. So, over the course of last year, we surveyed our employees 7 times, and I read personally over 20,000 comments related to how people were feeling about the changing work environment, how they were finding working from home, what they were missing, what they felt that they were gaining, and so really we had every opportunity to learn from our people around what they liked and didn't like around working from home in a full-time context. You know, we asked our people about the lessons learnt over the year, and one of the common themes that really came through from our traditionally office-based employees was this belief that we don't need to be in the office Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 to be effective. That was really one of the key comments that came through loud and clear from our people around the lessons from 2020. So I think the first tip would offer for folk on to listen to your employees, take the to talk to them, to understand what's worked for them and what hasn't, as you're starting to think about shaping your office environment moving out of COVID. You know, people told us that they liked the flexibility. They were able to bring health and well-being into their lives and prioritise it in ways that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to. They were having meals with their families every night. They were doing personal training sessions at lunchtime. They were incorporating walking meetings into their day. And as an organisation, we stand for health and well-being. And so it's very important for us that the experience that our people have emulates what we want our customers and our communities to feel too. So, you know, hearing that it was having a positive impact on our employees' health and well-being was sort of tick for us when we did survey and understand how people were feeling. And one of the other common themes that came through from the survey was how well connected everyone actually felt. So there was opportunities, I'm sure you can all relate, to see our employees in a different context, to meet their children, meet their pets, see their renovations. I always tell the story about how last year I was interviewing a senior exec for a role in our organisation, and he had to do the interview from his wardrobe because that was the only place that he could sit to have quiet time from his kids. It was right during the heavy lockdowns that the whole country were in, and it was just fascinating. I got to see the insight into his Hawaiian shirt collection, and we were able to connect really quickly and have a laugh about that and sort of the trials and the tribulations of trying to homeschool your kids while working. And you know, you can look back on that and appreciate some of those moments that you were able to have and you were able to connect with colleagues that you probably wouldn't have been able to do so quickly. So I think, you know, we certainly heard loud and clear from our people that we don't need to be in the office 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. We like the flexibility. We are able to bring health and well-being into our days, and we have been able to connect meaningfully with our colleagues throughout this time. So I think the first tip from me would be really around listening to your employees. The second tip I think would be to actually understand from your people how they want to and what they want to use the office for. You know, what is it that, when is it more effective and more productive to be in the office versus just needing to be there, as I said, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So we spent a lot of time actually talking to people, running focus groups, getting a sense of when you know, if you were to, rather than think about the office as the place that you have to go to, what would make you want to go to the office? When would it be effective to be meeting with your colleagues, under what circumstances? So we spent a bit of time actually understanding that, and I think that really helped us formulate this new world coming out of COVID. where we have sort of redefined the purpose of the office so that it's a place to go to connect and to collaborate, and a place to go to for people if they don't have a safe space at home too, to do their concentration work, rather than a place to go to just because it's Monday and that's what we've always done. So we came up with that model based on feedback from our people around how they, the purpose that they felt that the office served. And then I guess the last tip that I would have would really be around staying true to the values of your organisation as you're thinking about this. So for Medibank, we were already quite far along the progression around flexibility. We had a very strong stance around flexible work practices. We also had an activity-based working office. So, we were completely open plan. No one had a desk, no one had an office. It was all, you come in and you sit where you need to, depending on the type of work that you do. So it was quite a natural progression for us then to go from that to where we've landed. I can understand that that it might be a bit harder if you're coming from an organisation where you've got your set office, you've got your set desk. I mean, that will feel like a big shift. So I think it's important to, whilst it's helpful to hear what other organisations are doing, you really do need to anchor yourself back to what's your starting position as an organisation and what's important to you from a values perspective. I think, we looked at Medibank, and for those that aren't familiar, we have quite a diverse and geographically spread employee base. So we have, 650 clinicians that work providing telehealth services permanently from home. They've never worked in the office. We have people that work in residential aged care facilities, people that work providing home care. We have a whole retail network. So almost 2/3 of our employees were never office-based employees. And so, for us, it felt like a natural step again to think about, well, why do we make the office such an important thing for our office-based employees? We've actually had the opportunity to put ourselves in the shoes of our colleagues that don't work in the office, and there's been some great learnings around that, and there's been some things that we wouldn't want to take from the last year. And I think keeping all that in mind is really, really important. And agreeing some principles that that are important to your organisational culture. And for us, it was really around inclusivity and choice. So for the employees that we had that weren't based in our Melbourne 720 Burke Street, which whilst we never called it a head office, that's effectively what it was. 1,200 of our employees were based there permanently. And for the employees that didn't work at 720 Burke, they actually really struggled pre-COVID. It was difficult being the only person that was dialing into a meeting. Everyone else was in a room. It was difficult to add value equally because it is hard when you're not in that physical space with everyone else. And so, again, for us, we wanted to make sure that the lessons from last year, which we really saw the inclusivity piece ramp up because suddenly everyone was having one screen, you could see body language, you could read, you could hear what people were trying to say, you could see you can actually see people's faces. For the first time ever, that was a real even playing field for everyone. And for us, given our values around inclusivity, that was a lesson that we absolutely agreed as a leadership team that we wanted to take forward. And then the choice piece really, again, it's been something that as an organisation is very important to us, is providing our employees with choice. And we feel that the way that we've redefined the purpose of the office does provide a lot more choice for people, and it really does empower people to be able to make decisions around where they do their work, as opposed to necessarily feeling like they have to be in the office moving forward. So the top 3 tips, just to sum that up, very quickly, is listen to your people, understand why they want to use the office, and stay true to your values, and understand your starting position when you're thinking about where you want to go to from here.
Thanks, Shelley. Incredibly timely, given that the restrictions have changed here. And I just want to acknowledge that I said before we were all in Victoria, but we're not. So kia ora, Roger, to you from New Zealand as well. I know that a lot of what you've said will resonate with Michal because we've had some similar conversations about this. And I know that when we were talking, one of the things that your point, Shelley, about connection and collaboration, that point about how do you connect and collaborate when we are in this hybrid environment or working virtually has been something you've been thinking about. Do you want, so first of all, is there anything you'd like to pick up from what Shelley said? But I'm particularly interested in your thinking about connection and culture when we're working virtually a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think that one's kept me up at night, that connection and culture question, and still struggle with. But I guess we were very different in organisation. We're quite small. When COVID started, I think we had around 40 staff. We've got about 55 now, which is a significant growth during COVID. But we had a policy because we couldn't imagine how case managers could work from home and deal with family violence at home. Our policy was you really had to be in the office unless you're working on a piece of work. There was something in particular you had to do that you would work from home. So COVID hit us completely as, okay, it wasn't safe to work from home, and now it's the only safe place to be is at home. And so how do you create that level of safety? Because we hadn't considered it. So we were nowhere near ready for that conversation. And, you know, in 10 days, it just happened because like so many other smaller organisations, we just went from A to B without trying to think, and then trying to have to pull it back into engaging in those questions about belonging and culture and identity and how you share and be together. So I feel like it was a little bit more reactive than your experience. But so where we are today is we're still, we've got a hybrid model, so staff are coming into the office. We've just made it compulsory for 2 days a week. One day with your team and the other day, any day that suits you and your work-life balance. So, and the reason we've made that choice is because trying to get people to have that identity and support networks within their teams and then also feel part of the organisation. So I've kind of, I guess, come to that conclusion that we do need a lot of face-to-face time, but also picking up on what you said, I think, Shelley, around recognising there were lots of strong benefits when we work from home, and we don't want to get rid of that as well. So how we're working with culture has been really challenging because I think we're a different organisation. Having about 1/3 of the organisation just come on board during inTouch has also challenged us to how we express it. One of the most common things we did was with food. There was always food. Lunchtime was about tasting other people's food. And so how you actually said, well, food is nice, but we're a lot more than that. And to actually have that conversation has been really interesting. So we've challenged a lot of assumptions about who we were through this process. And I think, yeah, that struggle of making them feel they're part of inTouch, they're part of the Specialist Family Violence Service, it's a huge journey.
I think that point, one of the things that really has stood out to me, and I don't know about you, but I'm having this conversation with just about everybody now about what are they doing, how are they managing it, and that there are some consistent themes, but there is also a great deal of diversity about the way organisations are handling it and thinking about this. Shelley, talk to us a bit about what some of the practical things you're putting in place, the planning and systems to think about this year in response to, I mean, one of the things that's been challenging already is we started planning and then we had a lockdown. And I think that's taken away a lot of people's, it's taken a while to rebuild confidence too about coming back into the office. I'm noticing with my team. What are some of the things that Medibank has been putting in place, Shelley?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we've really redefined the purpose of the office around this notion of collaboration, connection, and if you need to concentrate. And so we refer to these as our 3 modes of working. And what we've encouraged every team to do is to have a discussion around their operating rhythm and to say, okay, if these are the various meetings that we're having, and these are the times that we need to come together as a team, when is it going to be more effective to do that in the office? So as an example, in the People and Culture Leadership team at Medibank, we agreed, and we have members of this team that are based across Melbourne and Sydney, we agreed that we would meet actually only once a quarter in person, and it would be like a 2-day, it would be a 2-day offsite. You know, we'd really focus on our strategy, our people. Those types of conversations we know will be more effective and more meaningful if they are done face to face. We agreed everything else can be done virtually. And for us, virtually means everyone on their own individual screen. So even if you happen to be in the office on the same day as one of your colleagues for a PLT meeting, you're still going to be dialing in on Zoom on your individual screen so that everyone still can see and have access to the same viewing of that meeting as they would have before. And then outside of sort of when the people and culture leadership team meets, there's, you know, I'll have one-on-ones with my people leader, and, you know, we'll make sure that once a month we're doing that in person, so that we are also having some of those discussions and maintaining our relationship, and doing that really face to face. And particularly when it comes to things like performance discussions, development discussions, things like that, those would be, of course, better done face to face. And so then we're asking every team to kind of go through that together themselves. Then I've had that discussion with my team. All right, guys, what's our operating rhythm? Right, we catch up fortnightly. How frequently do we want to do that in person? And then it goes down and down and down. And so that's really how people are organising themselves around using the office. And for us, we felt that was a better way of, for us, we felt that it was much more purposeful rather than trying to say, okay, you've got to be in the office 3 days a week, because naturally people would say, well, what am I going into the office for? And for us, it was about really labeling that well and making it very purposefully around collaboration and connection. And I think because it was really important, I think, when you start to think about the fact that you might have part-timers, and if you put a number of days that they need to be in the office, how does that work for part-timers? Do they then also have to be in the office that many days? Is that equitable? And so again, we've really kind of put the power back into our people to make those decisions around when they're collaborating and when they're connecting, and people leaders are setting the bar around what the minimum standards are. And as I said, for our people and cultural leadership teams, it's once a quarter, and we're completely okay with that. And I guess what we'll do is just monitor that over time to understand, is that still working for us? Are there things that we might need to dial up and down to better work on our relationships, or, you know, potentially some of the challenges that we're having? Because the other, I guess, context that's helpful to put over it when we are talking to our people is, you know, each team is going to be at different stages of their relationships. There's the norming, storming, and that might also play a role in determining how frequently you're meeting in person too. So we've really, as I said, put the power back onto our people to kind of make those decisions. But with a very strong message around there are times when collaboration and connection does need to be done in person, and you will still be required to come to the office for those occasions. The COVID overlay has actually provided us with some helpful data collecting. So I'm sure many of you are using a booking system or a way to manage exactly who's coming into your office when. And so because of COVID, we've been able to, bring that booking system into the organisation. And whilst it's deemed to be, a little bit bureaucratic, sure, it's actually really helpful for us in understanding how people are using the office space. And, we'll be using this booking system for 6 months plus, and that's going to give us some very important data around, how frequently people are coming in, what they're doing when they're coming to the office, what types of spaces they're using, so that down the track when we look to potentially make changes to our property footprint, we've got some very real data and insights to inform those decisions. So that's kind of how we are working through that at the moment. We have a very big office space, so space isn't an issue for us. And at the moment, we're seeing there's about a 15% uptake in people using the office in terms of our COVID capacity. So we're not in a position where we're having to turn people away, put it that way. But as I said, using the data over the next 6 months to help inform some of our longer term property decisions will be really good.
Yeah, that will be incredibly useful to get those insights. Michal, I was thinking about your comment about nearly a third of your workforce started during COVID. So to Shelley's point about teams being at different stages, you know, in terms informing the teams and informing the culture, the way you talked about, that's pretty significant, a third of your organisation coming on. And I know our team's a bit the same. We've got a bunch of people who, until we had a Christmas function, we hadn't met each other face to face. And that kind of adds another layer to things when it is your point about casework and social work practice. It was one of the things when we did when Fizzy and Vikos did the piece of research about stories into evidence, listening to what, you know, to your point, Shelley, listening to people what was saying their experiences of adaptation were. Some of those things that have always been seen as this is the way you have to do it. You have to do casework face to face. There were some really interesting things that because of the level of adaptation that we did learn. So I'm curious about what things you think you learnt during lockdown and during 2020 that you want to hold on to. What are the things that you think were adaptations that were made that, because we saw things from a very different perspective. What are some of the things you think would be good to hold on to?
This one sounds really obvious, but I think it's because we knew it but we didn't do it, which is about that agency. I would say that staff are more autonomous than they were 12 months ago, let's say, that we knew that people manage their own workloads and but there's such a higher level of trust that we have to give our staff now because we're not in the same building. And that was something I think because we didn't go down this path at all prior to it, I think we've learnt how to do that, how to be managers, to give our staff that agency. And I agree with Shelley's point about the checking in, because I think that's what we did a lot of. We had to do, you know, when we've noticed a few staff weren't doing well, we would do everyone has to contact their manager. The manager has to contact all their staff this week. We have to make sure people's mental health is okay because things would have happened or whatever. But what we did manage to do is give people more agency and freedom to interpret how they do their work, which I think as a small organisation, sometimes you become a little bit codependent in a way. You're all in the same room, you're all doing the same work. So I think we've given agency. So I think in this hybrid model, we need to develop how we maintain that level of autonomy with every single staff member and the greater degree of trust that we've given them, but bring them into the office and keep building. And I think that's part of the culture. It's like, I honestly believe we can't go back. I've met organisations that are saying they're planning to have 100% of their staff back in the office within 12 months. And I just feel we can't go back now. There are so many wins we've done. There's different ways of that work-life balance and opportunities of enjoying their work more and having different ways of releasing their work that people have grown and developed last year, and particularly in family violence. It's such hard work. And I want to hold on to that, but I also I do believe the culture piece, we need to be together to build our culture. So it is that balance, but I think it's the agency I want to keep. I want to hold on to how we've been better to communicate and to touch base and to probably be more collaborative, because there's just got to be a lot more trust. I think those are the kind of elements that I want to devise in the future to maintain.
It's really interesting, the comments. There's a couple of threads for me. One about the, Shelley, you talked about the level playing field. I think both of you have talked about the level playing field of being online. And it's an incredible leveler when you're sitting talking to, you know, and you're in the wardrobe, you're in your bedroom, you've got your kids walking into the room. It has built very different relationships across teams. And I agree. I don't think we can go back from that, you know, in terms of what that means around, so the level of engagement and trust and how you're able to build it much faster, and the agency that comes from that, about, you know, about doing work remotely. I heard one person talk fairly early on about, from another organisation, was really resisting letting people go home because, oh, we can't trust what they're going to be doing. If we can't see them, we can't trust what they're going to be doing, which is pretty problematic response to expectations around work. I'm really sorry. That's a bit, if anyone else is a bit distracted, I've got a bit of interference sometimes, so apologise if I'm stopping. And please put questions in the comment. I'll respond to the one that's in there from Andrea in a minute. But if you've got any questions you'd like to ask Shelley and Michal, please drop them in and I'll ask them. What are your thoughts about that, you know, in terms of the, Shelley and Michal, about the changing, what's changed in terms of the relationships and what we can do to kind of foster that? I think, Shelley, your comment about, we've been talking about that even if you're in the office, being clear about what meetings are virtual and how do we manage that everyone being on the screen so that it's not that you're the one standout who's not. Some of those sort of, you know, what are the things that you're thinking about? How do you hold on to that agency? How do you hold on to those?
Yeah, I mean, we have on our flexible journey, which started many years ago now, and we had a flex better policy where basically we had a principle that every role can have some form of flexibility built into it, but not all flexibility can be in every role, if that makes sense. So even before COVID, we were seeing large take up on things like different start and finish times, you know, people working from home, part-time, full-time, job sharing, all that, all the normal flexible stuff. And it was at that time that we started to really enter into the conversation with our leaders about this notion of line of sight management, needing to be able to see your leaders to believe that they're working. And what we did was really change the conversation so that it's actually about the outcomes that we get from our people as opposed to the inputs. And so we've done a very intentional job over the past few years of focusing, you know, making the focus really around the goals of our individuals, what they're working towards, and then measuring to them to the outcomes of those goals versus how many hours they're in the office or whether they're wearing corporate or casual clothes or anything like that. So the conversation really with our leaders is now very much around outcomes, not inputs, and being really clear with our people around what good looks like and what we expect and what the goals are. And so I think if you're really clear with your people on what's expected from them and their roles, and then you give them the autonomy and trust to deliver on that, you're going to get far more discretionary effort from them versus, you know, micromanaging people or needing to see them at their desk to know that they're working, when we all know that someone can be sitting at their desk and doing nothing all day if they really want to. And that's really helped us. And as I say, getting that discretionary effort from our people, making them more engaged. I mean, autonomy is one of the greatest things you can give your employees, and in return, you'll get so much more from them. So, as I said, we've really changed the conversation so that it is about outputs, not about inputs. And even when we're having performance discussions and we're having calibration sessions with leaders about teams, and if I start to hear someone say, oh, they've just put in so many hours, I'm like, that's actually not what we're measuring here. We don't measure hours, we measure outputs. And I want to hear people talking about that. And as I said, that's been a real shift for us, and that's helped build the trust. And then you manage to that as opposed to managing to whether or not they're in the office. It's a much more meaningful conversation.
There's a question in the chat that raises another element of this, which is the, you know, it goes back to Shelley's point around purpose of being in the office. And so this is thinking in the context of family violence services and what we know about and there's more I think we still need to know about what works well virtually or face-to-face, balancing the needs of your workforce against the needs of the community. So the question is about how do you balance the benefits of hybrid working model for staff with the impact on community service clients who want face-to-face services. So how do you think about that balance, Michal? What have you been thinking and talking about that?
I love Shelley's talking about purpose in the office, that what are you doing there? Because I think one of the things we're struggling is you can't just have a normal day in the office. You've got to make the most out of being with your colleagues versus as much as home. We're at that discussion now around outreach. So we're working on a hybrid model at the moment where the assumption is that it's about being in the office or being at home. Now we're starting to introduce the discussion is that when do we go back to the courts? When do we start co-locating other services? When do we start meeting the clients more than that urgent meeting? So again, it's those benefits that I think our service model has always depended on meeting the needs of the clients, and we are going to continue to do that. And so we are going to go face to face. There's just no way you can meet the needs of the clients without it. But what we have to, I think, introduce, and now that you've given me that word, Shelley, purpose, I'm just going to keep using it. It's about when we're talking to the client, identifying where the purpose is so that when we are meeting the client, it is the most beneficial use of the engagement and also of the staff's time, because it is a huge issue. So maybe the staff's going to be working out of their, working in their home only 2 days, but they may only be at inTouch 1 day because they've got other things to do. And that's the developmental. But I think the sector is very client focused, and we will be going back to understanding what that means. But I think we have to put more purpose into those meetings that we have with the clients. But without a doubt, it's going to happen, but it will take time, because I think also picking up on a comment that was mentioned before is people are still nervous. We've got 0 community infections. We've got no people coming in Victoria. We've got no people coming in from overseas. We've got 0 community infections, and people aren't totally comfortable yet. And so we have to build that agency so they're comfortable. We have to build that collaboration so when they're not comfortable, we can learn about it. But we're going to have to be outward facing as a sector because our clients need us.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point. And one of the values that we have in Medibank is, we're customer obsessed, and we've started to sort of describe what our values look like in action in this new context. And one of the actions that sits underneath the customer obsessed value is that you're always putting the needs of your customer. You've got the needs of your customer in mind when you're thinking about where you work. And so, if it is in the interest of the customer to be with them face to face, then it's expected that you would do that. On the piece around the safety around COVID, we've actually started to probably be a little bit more strong. We're taking a bit of a stronger stance on that now. I think, as you say, given the community transmissions are very low, and we have doctors that work for us, and we have through the nature of our work have very deep relationships with external medical boards like the AMA and other organisations where we're getting advice. And for us, we feel the risks are very low, and then we're mitigating those low risks by putting COVID safety procedures in place when people are coming together. But we're actually starting to say, for those moments of collaboration and connection that have been determined as needing to be face to face, we are expecting people to now show up for those. And that's something that we're kind of having to manage at the local level around helping people feel safe. But the expectation is that that you are there for those important meetings.
It is really tricky at the moment, isn't it? Because there is a real sense of the long tail of the impact on the community, which includes all of our staff and teams, of the mental health impact of last year. Both the mental health impact and the sense of safety and anxiety. And I think also the other thing I would say for the family violence sector and government is, well, for everybody, but what I know very much for the family violence is the level of exhaustion. that very few people actually got a decent break over summer. People didn't have very much, and they didn't have much of a holiday last summer because it was bushfires. So we had bushfires, very little bit of, reprieve at the start of the year, COVID, and everybody, I think the other thing that we all noticed was that actually productivity went up. People worked harder. You can work harder when you do back-to-back meetings online, which you can do in a way that you couldn't do face-to-face. So there's a wave of both people's anxiety and underlying mental health, so reacting and more anxious about the most recent lockdown, and Shelley, to your point about the real risk as opposed to the felt risk, and how people feel about what the risk is of getting on public transport to get to work, of being in a space. I know I went to Sydney last week, week before, and I noticed myself counting the number of people in the room, because it felt like there were and I remember thinking that's a little bit weird, and that's not what people in New South Wales are doing. But there's a dissonance between the felt, what feels like it's safe, and what we know in reality is safe, and I'm bringing to that some underlying mental health issues and anxiety and exhaustion from last year. So what are you thinking about how we navigate that as leaders?
I think that's the last lockdown shocked me, because our muscle memory, what became clear is our muscle memory collectively is towards lockdown. It's not towards going back to work. And that really hit me, that the comfort levels of people, within hours, we'd nutted down our emergency meetings about what we needed to do, which clients were at risk, how to ensure people had food over the weekend, those kind of basic client service things. That was easier than after lockdown, when we say, okay, so who's coming to the office? How are we doing this? How are we changing our practice? And a bit of it's fear and a bit of it's security and it's mental health is absolutely. And I think it's our biggest challenge, because to get the best of our clients, they need to feel safe in any environment. And it's the amount of risk versus the level of safety, they're not in sync at the moment. And I think that's one of our challenges, how we get our staff to articulate what will make them safe and how we collaborate together to help make them safe. But in terms of productivity, last year in 12 months, we saw 1,300 clients. We saw 1,300 clients in 9 months. So that's huge for a small organisation, and I'm sure it's the same across the board. So family violence, we've had such mission and purpose over COVID. It's been nice to say we're an essential service and that we're actually making a difference, and we've got to move away from that crisis way of thinking into what was our ordinary and what will be our ordinary, and how do we put purpose, and how do we plan people's professional development, and when can we let people say, stop this, do some training, because that's all the stuff we kind of got rid of. So part of it is, I think, working out what was normal and what's important, putting that lens of purpose down so we can be more meaningful to give people more agency, and kind of making a few mistakes and fixing it up along the way. But it's definitely different challenges.
It is. Shelley, your thoughts on that? And then there's a question I'll feed in.
Yeah, no, so the only thing I would really add, I think, last year we saw all the things that you're talking about, people being overworked, people not taking leave because no one wanted to just take leave to sit in their house. And, commercially, there was also a huge leave liability challenge that was sitting on the P&L as well. That, if I think very, very commercially here, and obviously that's only one element of what's the bigger picture here. But, so we started as a PLT to think, right, how can we encourage our people to actually take leave? Because first and foremost, from a health and wellbeing perspective, they need it. And so we ran a bit of a campaign around, sharing stories of people taking leave to just to do their home, upgrades, or start a hobby that they've always wanted to start. And it actually created it actually had a bit of momentum, and it had a bit of legs. We've got an online employee collaboration tool called Yammer. It's kind of like a Facebook but for corporates, and there was a real it went a bit viral, people sharing their stories of, you know, before and after shots of room renovations and, you know, and things like that. And so we found and we made sure that, you know, that our leaders were really, you know, taking a lead on this as well and sharing their stories. So we found there was a bit of groundswell in getting people to take, you know, to take some much needed time out through just storytelling. And we saw that actually had quite a good impact on our people, on their engagement, and how connected they were feeling to Medibank. And I think just, yeah, further to Michal's point, it was really, you know, dialing up the "Are you okay?" conversations, the personal connections that were gained over the course of last year, merely through the fact that we weren't physically in an office together, is priceless. I mean, you know, we were having much more regular check-ins as teams. We were checking in with our employees much more regularly. So we were, whilst you weren't getting that physical sense of being able to walk past someone and see, oh, they don't look quite right today, people were very intentionally doing that through virtual means. And you know, I think that we managed that as best as we could. And it's something that we need to continue to take a lead on as we come into the more blended ways of working, where, you know, we are facing a potential challenge where, whilst as organisations what we want to do is create the best of both worlds, we could very easily fall into a worst of both worlds. So, you know, I think keeping our employees' well-being at front of mind is going to be really important in leading through this change.
Shelley, I agree, and I think one of the real benefits of the conversations that we all had last year was that it's really not only acceptable but is an imperative to be talking about people's mental health and well-being, and mental health in a way that's not, you know, mental illness, but it's like preventative health. There are things that you can do to address your mental health that are positive and necessary, like taking leave and doing things regardless of taking a break from work, making sure you stand up, you know, every hour or so. There's that I think some of those things we need to not lose as well, in terms of thinking about our team. We checked in every day, and we've never, you know, we went from being in one of the teams being in an open plan office where there was not a lot of, you know, checking in with everybody every day, to our whole team every day now does. So it makes a big difference. I think we put some good habits in place.
Yeah.
There's a question in the chat about what if working from home is not safe? Domestic violence and family violence, child with a disability, where work is a place that is respite for employees. So you alluded to that before, Shelley, and I know that it's a real issue that you've been thinking about too, Michal. So who would like to respond to that?
I'm happy to. I mean, there's not too much more to add from our perspective, other than the fact that we do, you know, the office is there for people if they don't have a safe or conducive work environment, and that was very important to us. And it's not, you know, and that's for all of our offices across the country. And, you know, that's where that choice piece really, really does come into play. So even if you're not necessarily coming in to collaborate or connect, you can still come in to do your work. And it was important for us to make sure that we created that space.
Yeah, I agree. We had some occasions where people did come to the office and they needed to, and we always, in every rule, in every COVID plan we did, in every communication, it was, if you just need a break from home, if the walls feel like they're closing in, that's just a reason to come into the office. If you live by yourself and you just need another person around, just organise for a colleague to come in. You don't need permissions. It was that agency and empowering that people had to self-regulate and identify when they needed. And I'd say there's a number of extroverts who really mental health suffered when it wasn't safe anymore in terms of their well-being, that they had to come in the office, and there were some conversations to get them there. And just to name a few people that would help them, there was, you know, family violence for one staff member, and so we just worked it out. that at least your manager would be in the office, there'll be people with you. We had rules of minimum numbers just to have that sense of collaboration and support with each other. And I think there's probably more disclosures. People probably would have found different mechanisms to cope with how they're struggling rather than, you know, go straight to their manager, and they didn't have that choice. And I had a lot of empathy to know that I was their first and last resort because of the way we were in lockdown for so long and so hard. So we had to continually get people to come in the office. One of the things we had, which was quite random, is we set up with a social enterprise delivering food to some of our most needy clients. And so one day a week you got to be in a car with another person and drive 300-400 kilometres around Melbourne delivering food to people who just appreciated you. That was a great thing to get staff to do, to remember who the clients were, to reconnect with mission and purpose and values, and to give them a break from beyond the 5K distance. So we took any opportunity we had, and we had to check in a lot, but there were many times where we had to just get people in the office just to be with other people, to get that break from the walls. And I guess being essential service, we had that option, which was nice.
One of the other questions related to that point that's in the chat is about clients' anxiety about meeting as well, you know, not just staff. So we're talking about workforces and how we manage workforce mental health anxiety about reconnecting again face to face, but that other people in the community and people who access service are experiencing the same thing. So the question talks about people being offered phone appointments as opposed to outreach appointments, and that a lot of them are taking up the phone appointments.
Yeah.
And it came up in conversations again in the Stories into Evidence, which is on our website, by the way, that there are times that actually face that clients are choosing other forms of connection other than face-to-face for a range of reasons. What's your experience been about that, Michal, about people, and Shelley, I'll be curious from Medibank as well, about people's accessing services and whether or not, you know, from clients' perspective, the issue about safety and anxiety and what's the best way to connect. What are you hearing?
Our model has predominantly been a telephone service. So our legal service was one area that we did face-to-face, and I think as we entered lockdown and everything, the legal sector really struggled, and the backlog in all the courts is through the roof, and how you get consent and signed forms has been quite problematic for the legal centre. But for other clients, we just got into that group. But one of the issues, and I think a lot of clients within the family violence sector, a lot of victim survivors, is that what we had to do during COVID is ensure that they understood COVID and all the restrictions and everything that was happening in the community. So we put that as part of everyday work with our clients. Particularly for people with limited English language, or they were incredibly isolated because they had to remove themselves from the family violence incident. So COVID became a very living, breathing conversation every week with our clients because we needed to know that they understood. So we could address issues of anxiety about leaving home if it's safe to shop, because we did a lot of information sheets, a lot of supports directly for our clients and their English language needs and other language needs. So yes, there was absolutely increased anxiety. There was more feelings of isolation. What we found with a lot of our clients, we're normally, if they're not in crisis, we'll talk to them once a week. We were speaking to them every second day. So we held a lot of the clients' anxiety that then fed into our staff. They had to spend more time on the phone, less time doing the other pieces of work. They had to do all that education around COVID. So the nature of their role changed. The nature of our comms officer's role changed. We took the responsibility of COVID and our clients incredibly seriously, and that gave us that purpose, but also added to the workload. And that's something I think we're still needing to unpack quite a lot as we're taking up the challenge of how do we engage with our clients around vaccines as well.
Exactly. Do you have anything to add, Shelley? Or I've got another question follow up. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Only, and obviously the customers, when I talk about our customers here, I'm really talking about our insurance customers, so a very, very different cohort. But when we were in the full lockdown last year, the whole country was obviously in lockdown. All non-essential stores were shut. Our retail employees quickly had to learn new skills of being on the phone rather than servicing the customers in person, and it actually sped up our digital transformation exponentially, because in the past we would have had loads of customers come into the stores to do something that they could easily do themselves online. They could save themselves the trip. They could, just do it on their internet and get it done much quicker. And that's something we've been trying to, work with our customers on over the past 10 plus years to make them more self-service and really come into the stores when they have really chunky challenges that they need to work through, and so in that respect, COVID has been really helpful for us in terms of fast tracking our digital transformation that I don't think we would have otherwise been able to do. But I suppose I do want to say though that we still do have a need for the store. It is still a safe place. I once a year we go and work in the stores for a week, and when I worked in a store the year before, in Knox, there was a lovely old lady who came in literally every day. She didn't really have anything that she needed to process or get done, but it was actually a place for her to come in and have a chat with someone. So, whilst yes, we were able to, move forward really exponentially on our digital, it did further cement the need that we do have for the store and the important role that it plays in our overall value proposition.
I think that we've got a lot more to understand and more research to be done around understanding what is able to be done and actually high value to do digitally, like you talked about, Shelley. I heard in the when we were doing the Stories into Evidence was one of the community health centres talking about a diabetes program that they were running, and that they told a story about a bloke who dialed in from his tractor for a diabetes session, information and assessment session, and he said while he was on the tractor, I never would have come in and done this face to face. So there are absolutely, I think, some really high value things we can do digitally, but things we can't lose in terms of what we all are experiencing going back is so different when you can see someone in 3D and you're in the room with them, and the level of information you're getting back. There's one question I would like just a really quick answer to, the last question in the chat, about how you're dealing with some of the practical and IR implications of hybrid models, what it means. I mean, people's hours of work have changed. What about occupational health and safety in home office? And there's a bag of things. So, Shelley, could I ask you for a snapshot kind of response to that?
Yes, and what I would say is there probably isn't a snapshot response to that, but I think when we did think about what was the return to office going to look like, we actually brought together people from all over the business, property, IT, all parts of people and culture, and we set up a squad that literally just looks at policies and procedures and what policies and procedures need to change as a result of thinking about the office space differently. And so basically we did an audit. We looked at all of the policies and procedures we had and where anything was touched upon, ergo, place of work, hours, and basically upon doing the audit, identified the areas or policies that really needed to change. And as I mentioned, because of the quite progressive starting point that we had, it wasn't that a lot of policies really did need to change. We already had this Flex Better policy, so it was really just about adapting that. We are still contemplating the place of work and our contracts that go out to employees. Is that the home address or is that the work address? All these things I would say we're still debating, but I think it's important to first understand exactly all the policies that you do have, where the potential changes might need to be made. And if you don't have the resources internally, it's probably important to seek some external IR advice to make sure that you're laying the foundations right, so you're not sort of shooting yourself in the foot on any front there. That's probably the best way I can describe that one, unless there's any further questions specifically, Michaela.
Thanks, Shelley. No, that's a good start to that. Michal, anything you'd like to just top note in response to that?
Yeah. I think we made up a lot of policy and procedures on the go. We're still relying on the on-the-go policies, which aren't going to be good enough. And that's a big piece of work in the future. At the moment, there's a lot of goodwill because we've collaborated, but we are going to get to the pointy end probably in 6 months when we know exactly how we're going to land. So, yeah, on the to-do list.
Yeah, okay. And look, the other thing I would add to that is one of the things that we've seen a lot more of is I think the sense of working for purpose, being very united behind a common purpose has been a really consistent theme, and one of the players around the table and that has been the unions. And we've done quite a bit of work with Victorian Trades Hall Council, and a real sense of wanting to collaborate for the best for the community, for both our workforce and the community that we're here to serve. So the only thing I would add to that is a good resource is to make, and what was also noticeable was organisations who had already had good open dialogue with the union. You know, so rather than waiting for there to be a challenge or a problem and for things to blow up, where they had an established open dialogue around how to address some of those things. And I think it's a bit of an issue in the community sector. It's a low unionised workforce, and actually that doesn't serve us very well in our advocacy with government about adequate funding for services. But that's a whole nother conversation. We're at time, and I really want to thank you. And I've been writing some notes and some really key words that kind of struck me that I think, like Michal, you mentioned, I'll take away from this. I think what you talked about, Shelley, in terms of space being purposeful about connectivity, collaboration, and somewhere to concentrate if you need somewhere safe. The three C's will kind of stay with me. The sense of being purpose driven by the purpose in terms of engagement, whether it's clients or workers, coming from that place, listening to what it is that people want, and coming from that space, and the level playing field and sense of agency, and how much richer that is. I think for all of us, I feel like I have a richer relationship with my team now than I did before, and sometimes in the morning, that's what gets me out of bed, you know, is knowing that I'm starting feeling pretty low motivated, and the morning check-in with my team is what sets my day up well. So it's been of incredible benefit for me, the things that, you know, you put in place to support other people. I really want to thank both of you. It's been an incredibly rich conversation, and I'm hoping that people have taken away things that are useful. There were some other questions which we'll look at how we respond to. What we will be doing is sending out a newsletter with this recording attached to it. So if you've got other questions you'd like to pop in, and I wanted to ask both Shelley and Michal if you've got resources that you think would be valuable to share with the audience, that we could put links to particularly useful articles or other resources, please pass them on, or if anyone in the audience does, and we'll include them in our. So thank you everybody for your time today.